Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. I want to talk about David Crosby. I'm standing out here and it's snowing. I don't know if you can tell, and my neighbor's dog's barking. But I want to talk about David Crosby. Now, I absolutely love the Byrds. They're one of my all-time favorite bands. And I dig the Graham Parsons, Clarence White stuff as much as the next guy. I really do, and I don't want to downplay that. And I don't want to get you guys all, ruffle your feathers. But man, those first 5 albums with David Crosby are just stunning to me. I absolutely love that stuff. And when I hear those voices singing in harmony, taking folk music, into this rock and roll world, over Roger McGuinn's 12-string Rickenbacker, hearing those voices soaring together, those imperfect voices. These weren't people who were all Freddie Mercury type singers. These are people that are closer to Bob Dylan type singers. But when they sing together, it just creates something so much more than if they were apart. I absolutely love that sound. I love that era of music. And man, David Crosby was the glue holding all of that together vocally. Sometimes when you listen to those parts, like on Lay Down Your Weary Tune, it sounds absolutely just breathtaking to me. There's never been a day of my life when I haven't wanted to hear that. When I listen and I try to pick those voices apart, it's hard to hear David Crosby's parts. It's hard to single him out. When you're listening to Bells of Rhymney, which is, we'll say, if somebody asks me what my all-time favorite guitar solo is, first off, I don't have one, but the 12-string solo by Roger McGuinn in there, I'll usually say that's my favorite because it's everything I love about guitar playing. He's playing a melody and it matters. That whole song just feels like something that matters. It's a folk song about a mining tragedy that happened in Wales near Treorchy. And when they sing together on that, you can just feel it. All of that's beautiful to me. It's everything I dig about music. And David Crosby's a big part of that. I've heard that he's one of those cats that's really, really difficult to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure I could put up with it. But man, if the only thing that matters is what ends up on a record, if you're a recording artist and the only thing that matters is if it was what ends up on the recording, he's worth putting up with because he was part of some beautiful, beautiful stuff. And you have a favorite Byrds song, of the David Crosby era? The hits are all amazing, but man, those album cuts are freaking great too. I got the box set when it first came out. When was that? Was that late 80s? I don't remember when that came out, but man, it was just great. That whole first disc was just amazing to me. I just absolutely loved it. I can't overstate how much I love those first 5 Byrds records. And then the Crosby, Stills, and Nash stuff. If I had to think of my favorite person, we'll say Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, I'd be a Neil guy. We'll invent a new game where who's your favorite Beatle? Who's your favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young? I'd say I would be a Neil Young guy. If you take Neil out of it, who's your favorite out of that? I would be a Graham Nash guy. I really love the Hollies, and it's hard for me to not just gravitate towards Graham Nash. I love his music. And but those voices together, and it's hard to pick out sometimes David Crosby in there. You'll hear Graham Nash just soaring up above, and you can hear Stephen Stills' distinctive voice, which I believe is the width of that harmony. But I can't imagine being in the room the first time those guys all started singing together and just realizing, wow, this is something. We could work with that. Or maybe you wouldn't hear it while you're singing. They're too busy, blending with each other. That's something worth talking about. Is this was the day and age when the way people were recorded, they probably did all of that into one microphone live, with them all at the same time, and they were mixing themselves as they sang. And they're listening and in tune, and they're really, really worried about blending and everything being right. And so they might not have even heard how great it sounded at first when they're in the room cutting it, but when you walk out and listen to it back, that had to just be staggering how great it was. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, and I hope you guys stick with me, but I think this is a really, really good time to have this talk. I have a buddy of mine, my buddy Todd, and he used to tell me about the old men at his church. He grew up in a very, very conservative church, a Church of Christ, and the old men would sing together, and these were old men from the hills, and he just like, you have to hear them. You haven't heard anything like this. And I went once, and it was amazing hearing them sing together. And you realize that voices like that, and I would think of it like Ralph Stanley or like the traditional bluegrass stuff. When those people die out, there'll be another generation doing it. I was thinking this back then. There'll be another generation doing it, but it'll be different because technology changes. They're influenced by all the things that they heard along the way. It's just different, so when that dies, it's gone forever outside of the recordings that we have. And I was thinking about that, like in the southern, like the black churches, the way the folks would sing. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's a moment in time, and I believe it's hard to find that anywhere else. Well, and this is going to get back to David Crosby, I promise. But I was seeing the Cowsills. I'm friends with Susan Cowsill, and went to see them at the Continental Club in Austin, 12 years ago, we'll say. I'm standing there watching her sing with her brothers, and they sounded amazing. I mean, amazing. And I just had this realization, this is just like what I was talking about with this other generation of a different kind of singer. These 60s vocal groups, people don't do this anymore. They can't do it. It sounds different. They've been influenced by other things along the way. There's just, technology's different. It's recorded different. There's just so many things that are different about it. And when I was thinking, this doesn't exist anymore. They're doing this. I'm watching a dinosaur roam the earth when I'm listening to this, and it's a beautiful thing that I really, really dig, hearing people sing together like that. I think that David Crosby singing with the Byrds, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and even Young, there's a thing they're doing, and we don't think of it this way because they're not old-timers coming down from the mountain. We don't think about them where it's like Lomax. The Lomax family found them singing like that in the prison. This is something that's right out in the open in front of all of us. But to hear the way they sing on those records, those 60s, early 70s records, it doesn't exist anymore. And maybe they could have gotten back together and recreated that, and we'd heard those voices again, but it would have sounded different because of technology and age and all of that. So I sit back and think about the loss of that when someone like David Crosby passes away. And I'll say I had a friend, I'm not going to go into details on this, but I have a friend who worked with David Crosby on a project once. And this friend of mine talked about how freaking difficult he was to deal with. But the difficulties had everything to do with getting to a final place creatively of like recording this thing. It was all the difficulties this person put up with all had to do with art. They weren't just him being a dick, which I'm sure there's plenty of those stories out there also. These all had to do with, I'm trying to get this project to be as good as it possibly can. So when you hear some of those stories, and there's plenty of stories out there, think about that. Some of the difficulty, as a person trying to fight for the project and try to make it as good as it can possibly be. I'll just throw that out there. It doesn't mean, that's the whole story. And the last thing is I got to see him once. He came to Indianapolis and played at the Vogue Theater. There's about 800 people, and I was standing probably 15 feet away from him. It was the tour. He might have done a few of these tours, but it was with his son, who he'd just been reunited with. And they were touring around, singing songs. It was freaking great. If I remember right, he didn't really even do very many of the old songs. They did a whole lot of new stuff, but he was energized about creating and making music, making a statement artistically. And it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. And the last thing, I think I said the other thing was the last thing. One story that stands out to me, and a performance that stands out to me, was on Wooden Ships. You guys have all heard that. I really dig the song, but it kind of has a cynical backstory to it. I guess Jackson Browne lived with David Crosby on a boat right around that time. And David Crosby and Paul Kantner and Stephen Stills, but mainly Crosby, would talk about how civilization is falling apart. They killed Kennedy, Vietnam's raging, Russia or Soviet Union and the United States are threatening nuclear war against each other, and they're feeling like it's all falling apart. And David Crosby would talk all the time about how he's just going to get in his boat and sail away and let it crumble behind him. Jackson Browne, which it's not the way I would look at things, but that's a viewpoint, and I understand we all have those days, and he was in that point of the disillusionment at the end of the 60s. And Jackson Browne thought that was kind of a drag. He would argue, why don't you want to stay and fight and make it better, and help the people that survived this thing or whatever. And he's like, no, man, that's not what I'm doing. And then later on, Crosby came back on that, didn't feel like it. But Jackson Browne wrote for Every Man, which was an answer to Wooden Ships pretty much. And it was his way of saying, no, man, I'm going to stay and I'm going to do, I don't know the answers, but I'm going to stay and I'm going to try to make it better. And David Crosby sang backups on that. Now, when I think of David Crosby, I've said a lot so far about him blending in vocally with other people. On this particular recording for Every Man, when they go to that 4 minor chord, that 4 minor seventh, and David Crosby comes in and sings the backing vocals on Forever Man, you can hear him. He does not blend in at all. He stands out. And I don't feel like they blend together very well at all. And I think that makes it a better record. I don't know if it was intentional. It probably wasn't, but I thought it really artistically showed the difference in their viewpoints of how they looked at it. But it's a great record. It's my favorite Jackson Browne record by far. And for some reason, when I heard that David Crosby passed away, that's the first thing I thought of, was a Jackson Browne song with him singing on it. Anyway, tell me what your favorite songs that David Crosby sang on or was part of in any way, and I'll see you somewhere down the road. Much love to you.